Mommy, where'd you go? Come on, make me look cute.
Just next week.
Well, rise for the flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag, of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for coming. It's nice to see a large crowd out there. Appreciate it. Our work is important, but sometimes seem important to the public because they don't show up, but nice to have you here. Thank you. But this time we allow topics from the floor that aren't on the public agenda. You have something you want to bring to the floor, 5 minutes? Do you have anything? Yes, we don't. Okay. Thank you.
The internet?
Anybody on the internet? David?
Nope, I'm just here in my planning commission member capacity.
All right. Thank you. Glad you're here, David.
Glad to be here.
All right. Planning commission meetings for last planning commission minutes. I mean, anybody have any issues with written there? Changes? Fixes?
I move that we approve the planning commission dated October 8th.
Seconded.
Second. How do you vote?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
David?
Aye.
All right. Well, it's 6:01 p.m. The public hearing is now open. This is a legislative land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is a request for amendments to the St. Helens Development Code in response to the city's 2019 housing needs analysis to allow cottage clusters, which are essentially multiple detached homes on a single property. These amendments are also in response to House Bill 4064 from 2022, changing how cities can regulate manufactured homes and prefabricated structures. And House Bill 3395, 2023, adding single room occupancies to the list of needed housing in the ORS and requiring local government to allow them, plus some other related amendments. The applicant is the city of St. Helens. Because the legislative proceedings require the observance of certain procedural formalities, we'll take a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. Does any member of the commission wish to declare a partial or actual conflict of interest or bias in this matter. I'm trying to build a cottage cluster. Is there anyone from the audience? Does anyone from the audience object to the ability of a commissioner to make a fair decision? Not,
We're probably all clueless what decision and we don't
We're
understand.
gonna look at, we're gonna talk about it, right?
I have a question.
No, it's.
If we do not say we object, does that set up some sort of a legal precedence?
no, just if you know that someone up here,
When I received the initial mailer, I thought I read something in there to that effect, but I'm unsure.
Well, so in these public hearings, the first part is, do you think anybody up there is a snake and can't make a fair decision? That's one question. And then we'll get into the body of it. We'll have an opportunity to, say your piece and whether you're not, you just support it, you're neutral or opposed to the actual content of the hearing. So this is just whether or not they are fair decision makers.
if you don't know if we're a snake or not, you have nothing to say.
It's based on knowledge and understanding of the legal precedents as it relates to the subject.
Do you object for them to be able to make a fair decision is the question?
That was the
I
question.
don't object to them,
You'll,
Okay, that's
you'll you'll have time later.
testimony later. Yeah.
I do.
What's that?
I just want to make sure that we have just make sure you go to the Zoom people as well, please.
I didn't know there was any others.
There are people in Zoom. We haven't asked for testimony quite yet, Steve. I'm aware that you want to give some testimony during the public hearing.
Right, but I also want to state the inability of the planning commission to make a fair hearing.
What's the nature of your claim here?
I'll wait to be recognized by the chair.
Okay, Steve. Kowski, sounds like. Do you have an objection to the ability of a commissioner to make a fair decision?
No, I have an objection to the body, the decision-making body, to make a fair decision because the decision-making body has been operating under a gag law, specifically Resolution 1986, since June of 2023. And that has prevented the body from being able to engage in the normal function of a planning commission from that date forward. So I don't want to make sure that I state my objection for the record on the enactment of that law and how it has affected the decision-making processes within the city of St. Helens as it applies to this land use decision process and this quasi judicial hearing.
I think the actual question is, do any individual commissioner not, you feel would you object to the ability of any individual commissioner to make a fair decision? Not the whole body.
Yes, because I believe that all of the individual commissioners have been subjected to a gag law, an unconstitutional gag law, and have been prevented by Resolution 1986 from expressing true and correct and potentially contradictory statements and being able to function. So I want to just put that on the record.
I think we'll move on. Thank you. Is there any other people on
Who
Zoom?
are we listening to? Is that okay to ask?
Steve Toski.
Toski, citizen St. Helens.
You should have said who it was. Generally, the order of proceedings will be as follows: required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, close of the record, deliberations, and recommendation. Following statements are required to be made at the commencement of the hearing. The standards for recommendation by the commission shall be based on St. Helens Municipal Code 17.20.120. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the applicable standards as described or any other criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulation which the person believes applies to the decision. Before we go to the staff, I just wanted to point out this is a semi-formal hearing. So when you're asked to speak, then you come speak. It's not a time to just blurt out. If you would pay attention to that. Thank you. I appreciate your enthusiasm. Okay. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we go to the presentation. I think this will help you understand what's going on. So we'll go back in time. About a year ago, staff started on this effort to help catch up with state legislation, as well as some of the city's goals. As you know, especially between 2017 and 2022, we were just buried in development. And, you know, we got other things done, but we saw these things coming out with the state. And when are we ever going to be able to work on this? And the answer to some of that was last November, but we really got into it in December. So we started this effort, and the legislative amendments that we're talking about this year cover 5 years of legislation from 2019 to 2023. In June, so we met every month from December to June, and in June is when we got the council's blessing to legislatively proceed. That was not approving the law, but approving it in concept, so we can go through all this fun stuff here. Since then, we divided the code amendments into 2 parts. And that's what this slide is showing. Those items that are highlighted are the ones that we're conquering with the particular process we're in here right now. So first of all, housing needs analysis. So the state of Oregon requires all cities, I think all cities of a certain size, but we're big enough so we count, to have a housing needs analysis. And what that is an examination of your future housing need in a 20-year period and whether or not you have adequate lands to do that. And this is kind of part 2 of something we started back in 2021. The housing needs analysis had some other recommendations. One of those was to look at including cottage cluster rules within our code. And basically that is just a fancy term for having multiple single detached units. And we're going to be talking about detached versus attached as we get into this presentation. So those are very important terms for what we're talking about here. Now, we kind of knew we were going to be looking at this back in 2021 when we adopted our duplex rules. So I want to talk about those briefly because it lays a foundation to some of this. So once again, the state of Oregon passed a law that said that all communities in the state with a population of 10,000 or greater, St. Helens is around 15,000 now, had to allow duplexes anywhere where we allowed single family dwellings. And they had to be allowed on the same bureaucratic footing. So you couldn't impose different regulations on a duplex than a single family dwelling, like parking. You couldn't impose more parking. At the time, I would have liked to get into this cottage cluster thing, but it was just too big of an animal. So here we are. So that's why when you see part 2 up there, it's kind of the evolution from that 2021 effort. So then House Bill 4064, this pertains to manufactured homes and prefabricated structures. Again, a state law that all cities and counties are required to comply with. And this expands what a city has to allow. And one of the most significant aspects of that I've been a planner since 2001, and ever since I started in cities, single wides were prohibited. With this new rule, single wides have to be allowed within the city. Now, there are a couple exceptions which we'll get into. And then prefabricated structures is a new term, and that's included in our code. We'll talk about that too in more detail. House Bill 4064, now single room occupancy. Now, this is probably something you're going, what the heck is that? And usually when we're talking about residential uses, we're talking about dwelling units. So this is going to be another important term in addition to attached and detached. But a dwelling unit basically is a building with complete and independent living, cooking, sanitation, etc. So you have everything, including the kitchen sink and the bathroom toilet. So that's a dwelling unit. So a duplex, a building with 2 units, those are 2 dwelling units for 2 families. Now, the single room occupancy thing came out in the 2023 legislation, so it was a more recent thing. And that's a situation comparable to like a dormitory where you have individual rentable rooms, but you may only have one shared kitchen and or one shared lavatory for the complex. This is something that our code hasn't really addressed. And I have a story on one example in the community to help you understand the context of what we're dealing with. And now the single room occupancy thing, it's something that we don't have to enact law on. Although the state says we have to allow them, but it's one of these situations where I don't want to have someone come to the counter and say, I want to build a single room occupancy use. And our answer to be, well, I don't know. I want to have a better answer to that and a better tool to be able to help with that. And then we have some housekeeping stuff. Housekeeping is just a general term when we throw other things into code amendments. Usually there's a lot of effort that goes into these. And so we like to try to be efficient and cover other things too. So most of our audience are here probably because you were a recipient of the mass mailer that we sent out. And so several thousand went out. We got about 13 phone calls and a couple emails, and of course, lively bunch here to figure out how are you doing, city? So let's get into some of the details.
Can I interrupt just a second? I just wanted to say in our packet, when he pointed out the number of times that planning commission has discussed these, we've beat them to death over many meetings. So this isn't the first time we will have seen them.
Yeah, in the first half of the year, we met quite a bit. And I originally had these meetings planned a little bit sooner, but some stuff happened, so they're a little bit later out. So, but thank you for pointing that out, Dan. So I talked about this kind of being part 2 to the 2021 effort. And it's kind of an evolution of looking at the new school versus the old school. So the new school is when we look at residential uses, we're looking at the number of units and whether or not they're detached or attached. So I thought a little bit of history on this would be of value. So here are a couple of examples. The 2 on top, the yellow and blue, those are individual dwelling units, which we've talked about. And you can see those are in one part of one building. And then the illustration on the bottom, 2 separate buildings, each with a dwelling unit. Now, the city first enacted zoning in 1953, and St. Helens, I think, was the first community in the county to have zoning and probably one of the earliest cities in the state. I don't know that for sure, but the county thing I'm pretty sure of. So if we look at the history of attached housing, and we go to 1953 because that's when we started with our zoning ordinance. So a duplex or multifamily, and multifamily means 3 or more units. So when I say that term, that's what we're talking about. Duplex is 2. So all the way from 53 to a day, attached means duplex or multifamily. And then some years between 1999 and 2021, you may have heard the term auxiliary dwelling unit. Basically, that's a subordinate second dwelling. At the time, there were restrictions on its size. It had to be smaller than the main dwelling and stuff. But those complexities went away in 2021 with the duplex rules that I've been talking about. And one of the questions that we had then was, okay, as a city, do we want to allow these duplexes as a single building, or are we okay with them being detached? The council said, well, let's go with detached. The planning commission didn't have a problem with that. And then we sent the mass mailer just like we did this time. And there wasn't a lot of pushback from the community. And that's when we started getting into this more detached situation, but only for duplexes at the time. And we're talking about expanding that to the multifamily format of housing. So if we look at detached housing, then between 1953 and 1999, it simply wasn't allowed. Once we get to 1999 and we start talking about those auxiliary dwelling units, now we have rules that say, okay, a second detached structure can be allowed, although it has to be smaller. But then with the duplex rules, we said, well, we can just have the 2 units be detached and you don't need a special permit for it. So today, if you're zoned for a single family dwelling, you could have a duplex or 2 detached homes, assuming there's room on your lot. So let's get into the detached attached thing and get into a little bit more what's allowed today and what's not, and what would be with these proposals. So the top row, well, everything in green, something that's allowed today. And if it's red, it's not allowed today. So top row on the very left, one building, it can be a single dwelling unit, your typical single family dwelling, or it can be a duplex. So we've talked about that. The second one over, 2 detached units. Like I mentioned, that's something the city said, okay, we're okay with that. And then the next 2, you see a cluster of 2 and then a cluster of 5. That's what we call attached single family dwellings. The more common term used is row housing or town housing. And that's where you actually have property lines along the shared walls. So each unit can be sold separately, though it's part of one building with the different property lines. And in the city of St. Helens, that can range from 2 to 5. And that's why we have those examples. Now, on the bottom, this is when we get to the multifamily type of use. And again, remember, that's 3 or more dwelling units on a piece of property. So currently, it has to be 3 units in a building. So it has to be the attached product. And that's why when you see 3 and 3, that's hunky-dory. But because of that definition, the current definition of multifamily having to be in 3s, the second one over where you have a duplex next to a triplex, can't do it. But we're proposing for that to be okay. And then we go to the example on the lower right hand, and that's where you have 4 single detached units. That's more of your cottage cluster type development. That's not allowed now, but that's something that we're talking about being okay. Now, I should note that sometimes when we look at these code amendments, you're not always thinking about this stuff, and it can get people pretty excited because their imagination starts to go wild, especially about being concerned about the big city coming out here. A lot of people cherish this area because it's out of Portland and the mess that you have there. We don't think this is going to result in a massive change overnight, but the intent is to provide flexibility, especially for infill development. For example, let's say you have a bigger lot, has 1 house on it, you wanted to build apartments, and the first thing we say is, well, you have to demolish your house. With these rules, that wouldn't necessarily have to be the case. So just with the housing challenges in the state, we want to try to include some flexibility. So this next slide. Now this paper looks pretty old, and that's because it is. This is from our 1950s zoning ordinance. And there's some interesting things I want to point out on here. First of all, the definition of two-family and multifamily, it's more or less what it is today, and that is one building with either 2 or 3 or more dwelling units within it. But one thing that I thought was interesting in looking at our old code in preparation for this was in the definition of single-family dwelling, where it talks about a single-family dwelling in a building used or arranged for use as the home or abode, but one family, which is not more than 4 borders, kind of weird language, but it's not more than 4 borders, which I think was interesting. That's not in our code now, but that forecasts this single room occupancy type use, which we're dealing with in 2023. So it's just interesting that this old school 50s thing forecasted that. And that's because the definition of single room occupancy, according to the state, is 4 or more of those rentable sleeping units. So for any planning geeks out there, I'll give you something to tell people at your next cocktail party. All right, so what is a SRO? It is not a school resource officer, at least in this context. It is a single room occupancy. So we talked about the dwelling unit thing. And we talked about the single room occupancy not being a dwelling unit, but being a lockable place for someone to rent with the shared laboratory or kitchen. So my own experience, I've worked for this community for over 17 years. So you see a lot of stuff in that time frame. And, sometimes you get things that make you go, God, I don't have an answer for this. And this is one of those examples. So this is a building on Krause Way. And at one time it was a church. Sometime in the 1990s or prior, it was converted to a dwelling. But back in 2019, we had a building permit that came in, and that was to add rentable rooms. There was nothing really in our code that addressed this. And so from my standpoint, well, it's a single family dwelling. You have one kitchen, one bathroom, maybe more than one bathroom. I'm not sure about that. And then a bunch of rooms that you rent out. We really didn't have anything in our code that didn't go above the single family dwelling. And honestly, since 2019, it's been something that's concerned me as the planner. And we don't get these kind of things that often, but I like to have good answers, especially for neighbors who are concerned about this kind of thing happening. And then this legislation came out that said within an urban growth boundary, each local government shall allow the development of SROs. So the state is saying you have to allow this. Now, without laws, Oregon has what's called the goalpost rule. So we can't just make stuff up. Oh, okay, well, you want an SRO? Well, let's see, there's nothing in the code, so I'm just gonna make you have 50 parking spaces, 50 feet of landscaping. No, we can't just make stuff up. So because the state's saying you have to allow this, I would like the city to have the tools to be able to respond to this kind of use. Now, the state's definition is no fewer than 4 of those units that are independently rented and lockable for exclusive use of occupant. And again, this is not mandated. We don't have to adopt this law. This is something to make sure we have the right tools in our toolbox. Generally, if it's a standard single family dwelling or duplex zoning, it can allow up a building with up to 6 of those, no more than 6. And then if it's a zoning district that allows apartments, then it's comparable to the density that allows the apartments. If you wanted one of these, it would still require a land use permit. So it wouldn't just be a building permit. You would need what's called a site development review or conditional use permit, which the neighbors are notified, and certain things can be imposed, like parking. Parking is a big issue for a lot of people and neighbors, and rightfully so, especially in a community like St. Helens, which doesn't have robust transit. Now, this is a good example for parking. Because it was formerly a church, there was a lot of parking around it, and so it didn't have the impacts that it could have in a situation where there really wasn't. But if we have a new one that comes, we want to make sure that we have some of that stuff in place. And the amount of parking required would be 1 per of those sleeping units. All right, so now let's talk about manufactured mobile homes and stuff like that. So in the manufactured home world, there are a few different types, and it's based on the age. So if we go to the 60s and before, we have the residential trailers. I've personally worked for 3 cities, 2 counties. And in the cities that I've worked for, Cornelius, St. Helens, and Clement Falls, I've never seen one of these residential trailers within city limits. In fact, I don't even know if I've seen a mobile home, which gets you into the 70s, but certainly manufactured homes. Now, the reason I'm talking about all of these is they are included in these amendments. But for the manufactured homes are only allowed on anywhere you could build a normal home. The mobile home and residential trailers, they do have to be allowed within city limits, but only within manufactured home parks. We're putting those clarifications in our code. That's why I want to talk about these, but only in our manufactured home parks, which could have RVs as well. So when we get into manufactured homes, we have our multi-sectional and our single wides. And as I mentioned earlier, the code or the state law says we have to allow single wides and not just multi-sectionals. And as you can see, these kind of buildings can differ in their appearance from your traditional stick-built dwelling. Now, this bill also talked about prefabricated structures. And if we go to the next slide, we have some illustrations of those. And the way I would look at the difference between the two is the manufactured homes come into pre-made sections, whereas the prefab homes come in pre-made pieces. So you have more pieces than sections, but you still have pre-made parts that are assembled on a site. So this is new in the code, but again, the appearance can differ significantly from your traditionally stick-built product. So this brings us to the next slide. So why then are we talking about our historic resources and our historic district? It's kind of weird. Not for you, you're a historic landmarks commission. It may be kind of weird for you. Why are we talking about this? So the state allows us to prohibit manufactured and modular homes within historic districts and adjacent to historic landmarks. So I should kind of talk about what those mean. So the historic district we're kind of in the middle of it here in downtown. That was something created in the 1980s. So it's a boundary and everything within the boundaries of it. But we have these landmarks that are scattered throughout the community. And basically what those are individual historic things, mostly buildings, a couple rock walls and the plaza out here in front of the courthouse, which isn't a building. Those are the city's officially designated historic resources. And the law allows us to say no manufactured or modular home adjacent to those. And that's what we've included in our code because of the appearance thing. Now, this table, there's a lot of information here. This is the summary of our residential uses and includes what's existing and some of the proposed stuff. The proposed stuff is in. And when we were looking at our various stuff, we wanted to audit for consistency. We wanted to make sure the attached and detached was clear based on the zoning district. And then our highway commercial zone, that's the commercial strip on the side of the highway opposite of the railroad. Didn't have a lot of rules about density and stuff. And so that's something that we're clarifying. It does say they need to be above your commercial uses, not on the ground level, but there's nothing that really says what the density cap is. And so we're talking about limiting that to 2 because that's kind of our core residential. And I did note an error earlier today under general commercial when it's talking about the single room occupancies. That should be more than 4 instead of more than 6. And I'll talk about that briefly. In any zoning district that doesn't allow single families and duplexes, the threshold for certain permits is above 4, not just above 6. Now, this last slide, this is our zoning map. And we can go back to any of these if there's questions. So here's our zoning district map. We sent a special notice to basically every property owner that wasn't blue or gray, or public lands and industrial properties. And really because it was defining the attached and detached stuff, we don't have any evidence, any clear evidence that's going to change the value of property. Back in the 90s, there was law that was created that said, when you're going to start messing with zoning, you need to notify people, and the state statute has specific language that's in there. And that's where the potentially affecting your property value. Whether or not we had to do that in this case, it was kind of questionable, but it's one of those things where when in doubt, send it out. And it's a good thing for people to be aware of anyways. So as the planning commission, this is your recommendation to the city council. They're the ones who make the official okay or nay. And that's scheduled for the December 4th meeting. So we will have another meeting on this stuff before the council with the planning commission's recommendation. The one thing I do want to change, it really doesn't change the content, but in the code itself, I need to clarify the standards better in the R7 and R10 zone as far as the single room occupancy. It doesn't change the content, it's just a little bit more words, and I'll probably make that amendment for the council one. It's just something I noted. And my mindset almost a year ago in working on this is it would already be a single family dwelling. So the single family dwelling standards would apply. But it's better for the code to be black and white and not have room for argument. So we want to make sure that's clear. Doesn't really change anything I presented, but for someone who has to administer code on a daily basis, you know, I like it to be clear. There's a lot of details, we could talk about this for hours, but that's really the overview of what we're doing and why we're doing it. What I have for now.
So, lots of little picky details. Exciting stuff. Thank you, staff. Does anybody have any questions of staff?
I do.
Commissioners?
Let's see. So SRO sounds like to me, I think we've discussed it before, it's like renting a room, basically. Clarification too on the allowance of the changes in manufactured home parks, rules, covenants and restrictions. How does that affect that?
CCNRs? I actually got this question. And I know on some other things, the state has tried to preempt those. I'm not aware that in this case, it would be a private matter. So if a subdivision had a CCNR, the city couldn't enact that CCNR, but the subdivision could make that an issue with that landowner.
Civil.
Yeah, it would be, yeah, thank you. It'd be a civil matter. It would be inappropriate, especially because what the laws are saying for us to impose that, but it doesn't mean that the association couldn't.
And then on cottage clusters, does the state have a definition on that? A clear definition on what a cottage cluster? I mean, what's it say that people can't come in and put 4 sheds in a yard and convert them into housing? Is there some kind of?
Well, you still need to comply with the building code. And the shed is not going to be a dwelling unit, probably. It's not going to have your complete and independent cooking, living, sanitation, etc. It probably doesn't meet the energy code requirements. And so you're still going to have the building code to make sure that what's being built is sound with intended use.
Do we have the authority to implement architectural standards on cottage clusters?
It would be the same as it would be for single family dwellings and duplexes.
Okay.
And obviously, you know, we haven't gotten to that, but at the very least, we have the historic protections.
Thank you for answering my question too. I was wondering if that included the entire district or just the reference district, so.
Yeah, so the historic district itself.
That's all I.
Any other questions of staff? David?
Good, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, staff. So the applicant already made the presentation, so we can skip that part of the of this requests. Okay, do you have anybody in the audience have a testimony in support of the application? I got this big buzz.
Questions?
You,
Up here though. I know.
Yeah, there'll be a neutral. If they're just general questions, neutral is probably the best category.
so
Do that now or?
So we have a testimony support, and then we'll have neutral testimony, and then the testimony in opposition. That's how it works.
Yeah, so if you get your questions and then maybe you want to oppose it after getting those questions answered, be good to. And if there's nobody in the room that's in favor and nobody on Zoom, we can go right to neutral.
We don't know if we're in favor.
We don't know what we're
So we
doing.
got through this entire.
It's like, hopefully it's pigeonhole, but it's,
I have,
move it around. What you say?
I have someone on Zoom in favor. Sherry Melling, you should be able to unmute.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in favor.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me? Okay. Sounds like I'm echoing. I'd like to just read a little statement I put together. Would that be okay? In favor of why I'm in favor?
Yep.
All right. So as of 2023, at a point in time count, there were 339 individuals that were experiencing homelessness in St. Helens, and 312 of them were unsheltered. So 27 were sheltered. And apparently there's about 33 beds in St. Helens for people that are unhoused. And why that relates to an SRO? An SRO can play a crucial role in addressing homelessness and financial security in Columbia County by providing affordable and supportive living options for vulnerable populations. And here's how. So you got affordable housing operations. They're typically more affordable than traditional apartments, and so that makes them more accessible to low-income individuals. There's stability and security. They can offer a stable living environment for these people, which is essential for individuals transitioning out of homelessness. SROs are designed to foster a sense of community. They're close living. They share, spaces, and this can be beneficial for those who are socially isolated or maybe experience trauma. And of course, like I touched on, it can reduce the unsheltered homelessness, and it can also serve as a bridge to maybe a more permanent housing solution as opposed to just a single unit SRO. And then there can be economic benefits to the county, and it can reduce the costs associated with emergency services, healthcare, and law enforcement interventions often required by unsheltered populations. So in summary, these SRO housing represents a viable strategy, I think, for Columbia County to address homelessness and financial insecurity, providing essential stability, affordability, and community support. That's all I have.
But I have a question of the formality of this. If Christina can keep track of the opposing and
I got that.
and not opposing or supporting or neutral, maybe we could just take them as they come and
Instead of, yeah.
put them in a column as they fit.
I just need everyone to be sure if you give testimony to give your first and last name so that I can put it in the record.
So, does anyone want to start with, you had a question and that maybe help you guide? Yes. It's better for the mic.
You're in the ceiling there, yeah.
State your name.
Catherine Ross, SS. More just questions, in all the things that were talked about. I didn't hear anything about like tiny homes on foundations. Would that be something that would be like within those cluster?
Yeah, so
groups?
the question was, how are tiny homes addressed here? And this is one of the questions we got in some of the people that we talked to on the phone. So, and tiny home isn't necessarily a legal definition. But if it was something on wheels, that's not a permanent dwelling. But in these rules, if you wanted to have, some detached homes, single homes on a property, and you wanted them to be as small as possible, that's okay, as long as you can meet your minimum building code requirements. So our development code doesn't have, it shall be a minimum size. So if someone wanted to have the smallest home possible, that would be fine. It would have to be on a foundation and otherwise need to meet the building code, which gets you pretty small.
What's the minimum right now?
And it's been a while since I talked to our building official about it, but around 300 square feet is kind of what I remember. It gets pretty small.
I was actually on there, okay. And then my other question was, you mentioned there's no clear evidence that would change value of property or so that is that the same as saying it most likely wouldn't affect our property taxes?
Yeah, so as far as your tax rate, it shouldn't affect that.
That's probably huge in everybody's minds.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Get your questions answered, and do you have an opinion if you oppose or?
I think I'll
supportive?
Okay. Sure.
Sure. I'm not gonna force you to make a choice. I just,
Stay neutral.
if you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can stay neutral.
I'm Vicky Noost, NJ
UST, looks like unjust. And I'm completely open, but I still need some clarification because I'm trying to get this in my head.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot of things.
yeah, the cottage clusters then, from what I read, because I read both of the House bills, it said at least 4 detached units per acre with a less than 900 square foot footprint and a common courtyard. And then I see that we're talking about doing 4 to 6 units per R5 to R10. That's quite a bit more. There's another area in the, is it 3395, where I kind of interpreted maybe where you guys are bringing it down to those smaller lot sizes, right, Jacob?
Well, we're not,
Talking about,
we're not. Cottage cluster is not even a term we're.
oh, but it's on your paperwork and it's in the house.
Yes, because it's this common term about having multiple single family dwellings
Okay,
on
so
a
we're
property.
talking, to you, the cottage clusters may be independent of each other versus attached like you're talking about up there.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so we get into this lower right-hand corner.
Mhm.
We're enabling the situation where if someone wanted to have multiple detached single units in a place where you could have 3 or more, that this would be possible. And at its core, a cottage cluster is basically a bunch of single dwellings on a lot.
And are they always single story? No, not necessarily.
Yeah, and we're not including any prohibition. We still have a building height of 35 feet, which is the typical residential height. But in this cottage cluster example, there's no restriction on the building size based on the building itself. You still only cover so much of the lot with buildings.
That's what I wondered, because it says less than 900 square feet in the House bill per unit. And I thought, how do you do that on a?
Which House bill was that?
It's 3395, it's section 20.
Okay, yeah, 3395 is,
Not applicable to her.
so the initiation of the cottage cluster concept for St. Helens comes from our 2019 housing needs analysis. Where when the city council adopted that, back then they said, we should look ahead at these other types of uses that are possible, including cottage clusters. And so we didn't focus too much on those rules. We looked at them a little bit back in 2021. Because when we adopted those duplex rules, we included separation requirements between buildings. Because we knew that would carry over into what we're talking about here. But we're not trying to create these new restrictions. We're just taking our old school rules, expanding them to allow this detached product. So if someone wanted to have something like this, they could. But there's nothing that says, each house has to be smaller than the other. They could be the same size. You could have mama bear, papa bear, baby bear, however you want to do it.
So in terms of easements and, the footprint and whatever the rules are for parking, on the lot itself, those still will all apply?
Absolutely.
Trying to make these things
Absolutely.
bubble in there?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the same. So as far as parking, the same rules that would apply for multifamily. So, for example, let's look at this again, the one on the lower right-hand corner. So in multifamily, the parking required varies depending on the number of bedrooms in the unit. So if it was a studio apartment, 1 parking space is required. If it's a 1-bedroom dwelling unit, it's 1.5 spaces, and we always round up in the equation. And then if it's 2 or more bed units, it's 2 spaces per unit. So in that lower right-hand example, if each of those detached buildings had, let's just say they were all 2-bedroom. For that to be possible, as far as the permitting process, we would need to see 8 off-street parking spaces.
So that's probably not gonna happen, unless it's a bigger lot.
Sure, yeah.
Right,
Mhm.
okay, so in terms of the, you call them now, what are you calling them now? They're not ADUs, they're R whatevers. What are they?
They're just two
Parcel.
dwellings,
Oh, yeah.
two dwellings.
In terms of those things, which are going to be individual and they're gonna have to have a separate bathroom and kitchen. And I evidently parking. Yeah, you know, that's not, is that different? for the-
Yeah, well, if we go back to the duplex rules,
But the duplexes are having to be required on any lot now, so
Mhm.
it's all rules, right? I mean, it's all lots. That this would.
all residential lots, yeah. So the duplex ones, we can't treat those differently than single family dwellings. So if we're talking about parking, it's 2 spaces. If it's a single dwelling, if it's a duplex, or if it's 2 detached units on a lot, it's 2
So
spaces.
2 spaces, 1 car per like duplex, or are they tandem? You mean
They
like?
can't be tandem. Yeah,
Okay, okay.
we, in 2021, we clarified that they have to be side by side. We can't have the tandem
So 2
situation.
per spot, I mean, per house, per unit.
If,
See why I'm confused?
I know, and talking about the duplex stuff,
Yeah,
because we have to treat duplexes like single family dwellings, so. In 2021, before those rules, a duplex would need to have 4 parking spaces. But now, we can't require more than 2. But
but most houses have
Yeah.
2 cars, so then you've got
Mhm.
1 on the street and 1 in the driveway, or, because nobody puts their stuff in their garage anymore.
yes, and that's why those rules were so painful,
Yeah,
because we see how people live in this community. But that was a situation where the state was saying, you have to do this. Now, luckily, a lot of builders recognize that parking need. They recognize that that's something people want as part of their quality of living life, and they include that. But that prohibition on requiring more than 2 spaces is just for duplexes. So once we get to the multifamily use, 3 or more dwelling units on a parcel, we don't have that restriction. And so that's when we get into the equation based on the number of beds in the dwelling unit, which can range from 1, 1.5, or 2 spaces.
interesting. So if you did 6 dwelling units, 4 to 6, right, on a lot, then you've got to have 6 parking lots or parking spaces, right?
Depends on number of bedrooms.
Six
and
or
there's 6.
6 to 12.
Wait,
But when we get to the single room occupancies,
that's what I meant.
so, yeah, so for
That's what I
those, it's 1 space per single room occupancy,
so you
so it
need
would be
6.
6. So you would still need the room to put those, and they couldn't be tandem. So you couldn't have some weird situation where the parking isn't
I
functional.
just don't see how this whole thing works on smaller lots. I don't see how it works on 5, 7, or 10s.
And in a lot of places, it won't. And that's why at the beginning I said, I don't see this just
Yeah.
changing things overnight, but it does provide some options in certain circumstances.
So, and in those particular circumstances, with the single units or, single, you know.
Single room
Thank
occupancy.
you.
Yeah, we deal with so many terms. It's-
I know. I'm used to saying ADUs. That took me a long time. So, in those particular cases, those are mostly gonna be in town, aren't they? Because they have to have services, and if these are people that can't afford a apartment or something, they're gonna have to, they can't be too far away from grocery stores and pharmacies and
Mhm.
physicians,
And-
whatever.
And this is,
So then
we,
you're infilling in town.
yes, and we are not adopting rules for stuff outside of town. That's not something we can
Far
do.
out in town.
Yeah, this is stuff
Outskirts
in
of
city
the-
limits.
Right, but you've still got places that are farther out from the core where all this stuff is, Safeway and Walmart and
But
all
if-
those
But
different places.
if there was a property on the city limit fringe that, someone argued is, an unreasonable distance from grocery store, it would still be something that's possible.
Okay. So
Yeah, I think ultimately that would be up
I'm
to,
going long. What was that?
was just gonna say, I think ultimately that would be up to the property owner and whether they can successfully rent dorm style housing out to people. We are just trying to set the sort of outer parameters for that.
Okay.
One of our planning commissioners.
Oh, okay.
We have one planning commissioner on Zoom, so.
My apologies. Yes,
And you
that was
you
me.
hear it, I can't even tell where you are, so.
And,
We're used to hearing his voice.
Who's that man behind?
and they've
the
gone
screen?
through this stuff at nauseum, so they're like, oh.
So you guys all know it, I'm sorry. So there are some properties in the community that are prior to the sewer issue. Before that became apparent and a problem, platted out. And all set and ready to go, and people have pulled out because it hasn't happened. Are those properties gonna be reconsidered for new zoning? I mean, not zoning, well, I guess it is zoning, if they're R10 or R7 or R5 now, and they're not happening yet. Can those be renegotiated after they've been platted out and approved? For this type of a situation?
Yeah, these rules would apply if the zoning's right.
Okay.
And if they have, you know, if they wanted and they could get it to fit.
They can't change the lot sizes at this point.
Yeah, that would be the.
And they can't say, oh, I've got 5 acres, I can put a whole huge community in here that I wouldn't have been able to do before.
Yeah, if it's platted, it creates some challenges.
Okay, okay.
And I don't think it would make good investment sense because of all the effort putting into platting, because the whole idea is you're creating these lots. So each can be sold, and that's how you're making it pencil. If you're not selling those lots, kind of shooting yourself in the foot
Right,
as a
right.
developer.
Yeah, okay. So are there, one last question, I guess.
Don't hurry through it. You got every right to ask all your questions.
I read all this and I read all the information and went, what?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I've been reading this stuff for months.
I know you keep saying these, and I still can't even get the wordage down, the verbiage down. So, what was my last question? At this point, are there any considerations? You guys are looking at certain properties that would be impacted by this, that the intention is to get these properties going after this happens, like say down on the waterfront? I don't know if that's affected by.
There are no. When this was created, it was a reaction to the state
Right.
and to our housing needs analysis. It wasn't based on, hey, let's look at these specific properties. We can make something happen at these specific properties. So there was no property examination component of it.
Right, I just wondered because a few years back, we were being pushed to do some high density housing, which we've done, and you said we were good on that.
Mm.
So I didn't know if there's a new push for something else.
No,
This
and-
might be,
The trouble is that he works on it when he has time to, so if there was a property that needed something like this, he might not get to.
hey, we'll just keep you busy, huh?
So we're trying to get these done ahead, thinking ahead, as he has time,
Alrighty,
so he'll be ready to go if that happens.
okay.
And
I
but
had a question for Jacob, just her conversation prompted me to think something. Just reminding of the property on Crossway. Anything in this, there'd always be an opportunity for a variance regarding parking.
sure, yeah.
Depending on where it's located, it's like the one on Crossway, because it's the end of a block, it's got a lot of street frontage. So there's no parking lot there. They just have a lot of
It's all
streets.
street
So I just thought, it's lots of things. This is the template, but there's still particulars of every particular lot, and every particular plan would always come back to you for see how it fits in the box.
Yeah, the variance lets us look outside the box as far as our rules. And then you mentioned, when we were looking at our housing supply before.
Yeah.
So our next housing needs analysis is required to be done in 2027. So that's a couple of years away.
6 years or so you have to do it?
I think it's 8, which is a new thing from the state. And I don't know what the outcome of that's gonna be, but my hope is because I'm sick of working on the residential stuff. It's important, but kind of want to work on other stuff. So my hope is we get this done and then we don't have to worry about the residential stuff until after our next housing needs analysis, which is just around the corner.
Yeah. Oh, one more question. ADUs, actual ADUs. Like in the past, it was, well, in Portland, they've instigated it and all that, where you could, like she said, put a tiny house in your backyard or something. But you can only do that if you have sewer and water and things like that, correct? I mean,
Yeah, you have to have
you
the,
can't just have a little tiny house and somebody's coming into your house and using the facilities and whatever.
yeah, because that gets into the dwelling unit question,
Right.
complete and independent.
Sewage and.
You have to have a laboratory that's connected
Yeah.
in order to be a dwelling unit.
Yeah, okay. Cause I know there's been people in Portland that have added on to their sewer when the house wasn't meant for that in the first place, so I didn't know how that went.
Yeah, plumbing code,
Right,
sewer
okay.
code, all that stuff would still apply.
Well, thank you, appreciate it.
That's some good questions, really appreciate it.
Well, cause I was confused, I had to clarify, and if, I'm good with it, you guys.
And it may, the questions may help everybody in the room understand it better.
I'll give you lots of time.
Huh?
Okay, let's,
That's a quick question.
Yeah.
Jacob, since in our current housing needs analysis, we have met our low income requirements, correct?
Our high density
High
requirements.
density, okay.
Yeah, there's not a stipulation of income, but it's the high density, yes.
And then is are RV parks included in that? Because really, the local RV parks are being used as high density housing.
They are, and I don't
There's no deadline on when they have to move out. They can stay longer than 30 days.
think we really talked about RV parks when we did the housing needs analysis.
I just thought of that when I was reading through this today and I thought, well, because I know like the new one over behind Mr. Goose is essentially
Sure, yeah.
high density housing and so is Marina. They're not really
You
RV.
could mention it in our next H&A, like how do they address that? What's considered permanent?
I guess the reason I'm asking is the SRO driven by? Did it check a box that we had to apply SRO because of the housing needs analysis?
No, it's simply because I'm sorry that you.
No, that's fine.
after the-
I think you're answering my question.
It's simply because this legislation says within an urban growth boundary, each local government shall allow the development of a single room occupancy. So that comes out in 2023. So now if someone comes to the counter, says, hey, I want a single room occupancy. I want to have the tools to be able to say, okay, well, this is how our rules work. This is what you need to do, rather than, I don't know, just go do whatever you want, piss your neighbors off. That's not the answer that I'd like to have. So it's a reaction to the state saying, our communities in Oregon, you could allow this.
And I know everybody has questions and concerns, but it seems to me that when we had to treat single family and duplexes the same, there wasn't a rush at your counter of people doing it. So even though it sounds really maybe scary is not the right word, concern that you're concerned, it didn't seem to affect things very much.
There's
Project that we worked on.
But there is already people renting out rooms in their house. And it's
Yeah, I
just
think,
they're doing it legally.
I think to that point, it's worth underscoring that SRO housing is not new to the Northwest or St. Helens. Historically, we've had SRO housing. Some of our first housing historically was SRO housing. So I don't know if there's going to be a huge rush of people rushing to do it. It's not the most popular option for choice reasons, not legal reasons.
Okay, I apologize.
Sure. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I believe Jacob may have touched on it. It's related to a foundation. Is that a concrete slab that is a permanent dwelling? Or is it something that a truck driver brings in, plugs it in and plug and plays? It's got the power, electric power, sewage, water.
and we're getting into the building code thing.
Yes.
It has to be permanent.
Developer comes in and they have a checklist and it includes installing separate meters, whether it's water meters or power meters for each separate dwelling. So all that plumbing, electrical and sewage and water would have to necessarily be part of that checklist.
Yeah, including the foundation. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's just my question. Short and sweet.
Thank you. What was your name? Mark Bailey. Name?
Hello, my name's Eric Green. I'm Colin's dad. I support this. I'm in support of it. Couple of questions. Thank you all for being here. So what I read, they want to remove the phrase catering to motorists. And to me, that sounds like you don't need a driveway, you don't need off-street parking. You can park on the street, because if you don't have to cater to motorists in the development plan, isn't that what that means?
Okay, so we talked about the housekeeping amendments. And one of the things that we're doing is in our highway commercial and some of our general commercial zones. And this doesn't really impact the residential stuff, but I want you to understand it, so you're not leaving here all mad.
No, I'm not. I appreciate you all
That
being.
made you smile though. So, and this is something that's drove Jenny and I insane. And it goes back to some of our early zoning ordinances, like in the 70s. So for example, in the highway commercial zone, it'll say retail establishments that cater to motorists are as a permitted use. And then retail establishments that don't cater to motorists may be a conditional use permit, need a little bit more bureaucracy. And so Jenny and I are going, what does catering to motorists mean? And this is something that I've been pulling my hair out and been doing a pretty good job of it over the last 17 years. And so it's like, one idea, okay, well, I guess liquor stores would not be catering to motorists because we're not in one of those states where you can go through a drive-through, right, and get a cocktail. But just really grasping for what that means. And also when you look at the non-highway commercial zoning district where it reverses that and it says your retail not catering to motorists is permitted, but if it caters to motorists, it requires the new bureaucracy. What the catering to motorists part meant,
Wasn't defined.
we couldn't really figure it out. And so we're like, this is stupid. Let's just get rid of it. But it has absolutely no impact on the residential stuff that we're talking about. It has to do mainly with commercial uses and commercial zones.
How come they included that language in all this then? To me, it seems to me like if you want to develop a property and you want to get as much housing on that property as you can, no driveway, no garage would certainly give you a lot bigger footprint for what you can put on the square footage of dirt. And so that's where my mind has kind of been reading all this stuff. And so you're sure it doesn't pertain to on-street parking or not?
I'm absolutely confident. And so if we wanted to allow those flexibilities, that's where we would look at our parking standards and have parking exceptions. If the parking is not a mandate, then you don't have to have the driveway, you don't have to have the extra asphalt. So we would want to have more explicit rules rather than some ambiguous catering to motorists, because that can mean so many different things.
Yeah, I think you should consider that when people are coming to you, because if you want to cram more onto the dirt that's available, keeping the driveway, the garage, and the cars off the lot and on the street would certainly let you do that. So I wanted to make that point.
There's enough street.
Huh?
If there's enough
If
street.
there's enough streets. Some of the neighbors it's around here, they got huge streets. Some of them don't. You can't even get a fire truck down them if a car parks on them. But in some of these older neighborhoods, there's a lot of street. You know anything about the minimum lot size? If you had an existing house, how much square footage of dirt do you need next to your house to be able to build something?
Yeah, there's really no change in that. And that's driven by the zoning, which tells you what your lot coverage is for building and structures. And so that's between 40 and 50%. And that's the percentage of building and structure footprint. So that's one thing. And for building additions, your lot coverage can increase 5%. Something we put in the code many years ago. And we increased that lot coverage a little bit too. And this may be a discussion with this stuff to talk about lot coverage again later on. I almost wanted to include it to this, but it was getting a little bit too big and I wanted to get it done before the end of the year. And it's already November, so that's the lot coverage piece. And then there's your building envelope piece or your setbacks. And that's all staying the same too. There's no changes. And just like there is an increase in lot coverage for building additions, there is a 20% decrease in setbacks for building additions. So for example, if you have a side setback of 10 feet, you want to do a building addition, it becomes 8. And that's bureaucracy free. It's 8 now, not 10.
Thank you. If I support this, if it were to pass, December 4th, if you all say, hey, this is a great idea, we're gonna do it, how long would it take before you're ready at the counter for somebody to come up and say, I want to do this? Which it's gonna take a year to implement? Can you have it ready in a few weeks? What's your timeline in getting it going?
Well, so December 4th, if everything's good, we have to have a first and second reading. So the first reading could be on the 18th and the second reading. Meeting on January 1st? I don't know.
No. Calendar.
They're not.
Yeah.
They're not meeting on that.
Whenever the next meeting is, it would be the first. But so we have the first and second reading. And then after the second reading, it's 30 days before the law is enacted. But as soon as it's enacted, then we're ready to rock and roll.
So a couple months.
Cool, that's fast. I think it's important that you pass it because the housing costs are through the roof. And I think as the city managers and council people and commissioners and planners, you need to do everything that you can do to get housing costs down. And this would help a lot. Thanks for your time. I appreciate y'all being here. Thank you.
Anyone else have clarification questions or comments? Something's really burning your.
My name is Cheryl Morrissey. I reside on Great Cliffs Drive. And I need a clarification on the historical district. So that's the only area in the city that is exempt, is the historic district.
Exempt from manufactured and modular homes.
Okay,
Yeah, just that part of it.
Prohibition, not even exempt.
Prohibition, yes.
It's exempt from allowing them.
Yeah, thank you for the technicalities.
so do you take these duplexes, fourplexes in a neighborhood? You take it case by case, depending on, like, for instance, my neighborhood has very narrow streets. There's a botanical park, there's old growth forests. It's in the summertime, it's a fire hazard. So would the city look at that and say, yeah, this isn't an area that we want more dense? Do you have the ability to do that?
Well, it's your zoning is your primary driver of that. And you're in an area that doesn't allow apartments. And so your area would only allow, we have the duplex is already in place. And it would allow one of those buildings to have the single room occupancy component, but not exceeding 6 rooms. So that's where the cap would be. I know that still sounds like a lot.
It is a lot. Because the streets are really narrow. And even though, like, some of the properties are large. And we appreciate the fact that we have park-like setting. When those places start selling, because my neighborhood is an aging community, then can we expect next door to have SROs?
And it potentially, but you would still have that permitting process to look at things like parking. But important part of that question is to recognize that the definition of a single room occupancy are 4 or more of those sleeping units. So in a lower density neighborhood like yours, you're not gonna get more than 6, but anything below 4 is still a single family dwelling and not subject to regulation. So you'd have to have 4 or more for the permitting to kick in. And that would be the situation even now, because the state's saying you have to do this. And the state's putting forward that minimum threshold, and that's what we're kind of stuck with.
And you have no way to, I mean, I'm pretty sure in Lake Oswego, this isn't happening. What's happening here is not happening in a community that stands up and says, we're not doing this. We live here for a reason. That, I mean, sure, it's not convenient to Portland. I don't care. I like the peaceful, quiet ability to be in my neighborhood, feel safe without SROs.
And you know, we talked about this for several months, and you know, there wasn't a time where the planning commission or council said, damn it, we're gonna fight the state on this. You know, we're just trying to roll with it. And they could have, I don't know what we would do, because the law states what it states.
Like I said, I'm sure there's communities that aren't going along with this. I don't know how they're doing it. Maybe something we should investigate.
If I may. I suspect that I'm not aware of any communities that are mounting a legal challenge to this. I think there are communities for whom it is less of a practical issue because their property values make it unlikely that anyone will be citing SROs in them. So to take Lake Oswego, for example, I think the economics of purchasing lakefront property in Lake Oswego make it unlikely that someone will be building SROs there. But I have not seen any indication that Lake Oswego is mounting a legal challenge to this issue, nor am I aware of any other community in Oregon doing so.
And my concern, like I said at the beginning, is we're trying to make sure we have the right tools in place. So let's say we're just like, well, screw this bill, we're not gonna do anything. And then we start getting questions. And the people say, well, I know you have to allow this, what are your rules? And we don't have any rules. Well, I'm just gonna do it. And then they do it. They don't provide any parking, any additional parking. And then neighbors show up to the council with torches and pitchforks. How could you allow this? How could you allow this? Well, the state law says this, we don't have any tools. That's why we allowed it. And so that's the circumstance that haunts me, that I want to avoid, making sure we have something in place.
But the community could still say, no, we don't want this.
Sure. Yeah. If you know, if that's the message and that resonates with the planning commission, their recommendation could be, well, we recommend everything, but scratch all the single room occupancy stuff. Sure. It's not something that we have to do.
I think your question is if that you can't enforce this law. He's just talking about the tools
Right,
to work with.
right.
Well, I just wanted to.
No, I understand that.
There is some building code issues there, I think, isn't there? Because a lot of houses in the Great Cliffs area had to have sprinkler systems, interior sprinkler because of fire.
Yeah, because of limited access.
So
Yeah, a lot of that stuff happened before my time, but
that street widths there,
Well, that's what I mean. At some point, it could become a danger. If you've got people, I mean, he's gone. Mr. Green was talking about people parking on the street. Some of our neighborhoods, it's already hazardous to drive down the street because yes, they're parked head in, but their trailer hitch is out in the road. Or the fire truck can't get to your house. I mean, there are certain neighborhoods that it just doesn't seem even safe to allow some of the things you're proposing here tonight.
and if these rules were in place and someone wanted to do it, but they couldn't figure out the parking, then they're stuck. So if it's a situation where it's a narrow street, they can't get it to work on the lot. And let's say then, well, I'll try to get a variance to have some relief, and they want a variance to allow some of that parking to be on the street. It gets to the planning commission. There isn't street parking here. How can you allow this? Or it's too narrow, and then it could be denied.
The fire department makes a comment that it would be an issue for them. And we would look,
Good to know. Thank
we
you.
had that.
it's really important for the citizens to show up because if
Yes.
people apply for a variance and no one shows up, it's not as meaningful to me personally as a planning commissioner as if we have testimony from citizens. So we really appreciate y'all being here, but continue to show up if that happens.
And I understand your need to put things in place for the future, but personally, I've lived here 25 years. I feel like there is so much happening with housing that has become out of our control. There's no code enforcement. I mean, maybe there is, but not enough of it. We don't have the people to even monitor if someone, let's say, we have these SROs and they're breaking parking. The citizens have no recourse with what's happening today with law enforcement, code enforcement. And it feels like what you're doing here is just creating more problems for the community instead of going, wait, let's talk about if we don't need any more. You said we had reached our goal for.
Yeah, for the housing needs analysis.
Yeah.
We are not deficient in our high density. That was the closest one. Our low density, medium density, we had, a ton of inventory. But the high density is the one that we were close with. But with some of the recent apartment complexes, which sure everybody enjoys.
There you go.
That met our standard. Sure, yes, and we hear it, our council hears it, probably more than me. So it's not something that we're putting our head in the sand, because we hear the concerns, but we have this, we're given this bowl of rotten oatmeal and God, it doesn't taste very good, but unfortunately, we have to keep eating it.
That's really sad.
Comments?
Well, and if I may add on to that analogy, I think in part it's if we don't create any rules, then someone can show up and say, yo, you need to eat the whole bowl of rotten oatmeal, and we won't have any recourse. If we have rules, if someone shows up with their bowl of rotten oatmeal, we can say, ah, your rotten oatmeal doesn't fit the rules, so we don't want to do this. So I think in many ways, these rules are meant to not entirely address the concerns that the last speaker just brought up, but provide a structure for ameliorating them, if that makes sense.
Do you have any other neutral testimony or questions? Support, opposition?
I just want to be a neutral. My name is Travis Brenner, and I just want to say I'm opposed. So,
You said you were neutral.
well, I don't know, the technical term, but she hit everything on dot, on point of everything. The apartment complex, you already have section 8. We have the support here. I don't know what your criteria is to accommodate the lower income SROs, but yes, it just, I'm opposed. I just want to get that. I gotta go get my daughter from martial arts, so.
That's all I.
We want to save community. So,
Yeah.
Thank you. Got young ones. One leave. I love saying it.
You're opposed to having SROs?
No, yeah, I
Or
don't,
having rules for them?
I don't want it.
Okay, thank you.
Go get your sister. You're a good boy.
Okay,
Catherine?
did you have something more?
Yeah, just,
Go ahead.
I said.
No, you can say that if you, okay, that's fine. Speak loudly.
Hey, Catherine Ross, just the, as long as like parking is being really addressed, because I'm by very close to the huge apartment complex on McBride and Matson, and there's, I don't remember, they had less than one parking place per apartment, I believe. And the amount of on-street parking, all up and down Matson and McBride is insane. And I know a lot of the people on Matson aren't happy because it spills over to their side. And I was one of like 3 neighbors that showed up for that, you know, when Legacy and all that was in the thing. We're like, what about, so I just want to make sure with all of this, because I'm sort of still neutral on it, that the parking is addressed and the street traffic is addressed, because May Avenue used to have like 3 cars a day and we all lived there. It's like, doom, doom. I mean, it's like people just fly us down that street, you know, so, and sort of outside this, but it is important. And if you're talking about high densities and like the other guy was saying, narrow, I mean, May Avenue is not narrow, but just that the impact on street parking really gets addressed in there somewhere so that it's not natively impacting everybody around these things. I realize we need more housing and blah, 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 but as somebody who is impacted and people just roar down May Avenue because we're some sort of a cut through to, I don't know, Skinnies or something. It's just insane. So as long as that component is really looked at, that would be my only concern at this point.
And that's one of the purposes of these is so that we have that component.
But there's less, I don't remember the number of apartments to parking places, but I remember bringing that up. It didn't seem to go anywhere, but it's a big issue.
But they didn't ask for any exceptions. They met or exceeded the minimum requirement.
Right. But I was like, you know, our input wasn't really, didn't mean diddly. Because there's still cars just roar up and down there and with no regard. I'm always jumping out screaming, slow down. So just, that's my last thing.
That hearing? Well, the only one here.
Just have one question. What's Violeta Baylets? These Violeta Baylets, I think I missed the.
Can you up to the microphone? It says a mic.
Oh, I can.
What has to be recorded, so.
Oh, okay. Violeta Baylets, and my question, I think I missed the size for the four dwellings. What's the size of the land?
So that's gonna it's a good question. It's not something we got into. And it would, the rules, the density rules for multifamily, again, 3 or more units on a property, those aren't changing. So if we look at the R5 zoning district, for example, for the first 2 units, it's the size for a duplex, which is 4,000 square feet. And then for each unit after that, it's an additional 2,500 square feet. So if you're talking about 4, then we take, it's 4,000 plus 75,000. What's that, 11,500?
So 500.
Say that again. Square foot, not at the house.
Last part.
7,500, I think it says 75,000.
Yeah, but are you referring to the lot?
Yeah, the lot
Okay.
size.
Not
How- how-
actual dwelling. footprint.
Yes, yeah, I'm talking about lot size. Yeah, so, I'll start again.
Sorry.
So it's not quite as simple as 1 unit per square footage. So what we do is we take the minimum lot size for a duplex. And in the R5 zone, that's 4,000 square feet. So that's for the first 2 units. And now I realize I gave you the wrong amount the first time, so I'm glad we're doing it again. So each unit after that is an additional 2,500 square feet. So if we're talking about 4 units, we have that initial 4,000 for the first 2, and then 5,000 for the next 2. So you would need a lot that is 9,000 square feet if it was zoned R5. Now, R7, R10 can't do it. The apartment residential zone is a higher density district, and so the minimum duplex size, maybe that's 4,000.
Were you asking about a 4-unit SRO?
Any of them.
Okay.
Yeah, just the clarification, what's the minimal and what's the, what's the minimum? So 4,000 would be the minimal and then,
Well,
and
for a
how
duplex.
it goes on. It goes
But
on.
that's how it works. It builds up.
And the 4, how about the 4? What's the minimum for 4?
Or 4 SRO?
Yeah.
I thought that was her original
Okay.
question.
I think it's in general.
Oh, okay.
All of the land, but.
Each one is kind of different. That's
Okay.
why it's confusing.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what's the 4 would be?
So if it's the SRO, and it's your basic single family dwelling, because what the state law says is anywhere we allow single family dwellings, it has to be up to 6 SRO units. By definition, it's 4. So if it's less than 4, it's not the single room occupancy. So once you're at 4, now you
It's a
are that kind of use. And up to 6, it would be the same lot size as a single family dwelling. So if your lot size is, let's say your minimum lot size is 5,000 for a minimum for a single family dwelling, then that same building could have the SRO with up to 6 SRO units. But you would need to have, instead of 2 parking spaces, 6 parking spaces. And so you still have to get that to work.
Okay, so can you give me a bulk figure? Just a figure for 4, let's say for 4 SRO units, what's a number of square footage for the lot?
It could be 4,000, 5,000, 7,000, or
Okay, so
10,000.
even 4,000 would fit 4 of them? Wow.
Yes,
Wow, that's tiny.
if you can get the parking to work,
But-
if you can get to the parking to work.
Okay,
So-
could you work the parking in 4,000?
I think you could do that if you had the first level as only parking and then your living was on the next couple levels. But then is that gonna pencil? And is a developer gonna want to do that?
Okay, but if it's 4,000, I can still work with it. It's like, okay, I have about 4,000.
Yeah, it's-
So I'm gonna, draw, get the developer, whatever.
Yeah, that doesn't,
I can still work with it.
it doesn't become automatic, hell no.
Right, okay. Okay, thank you.
I'm more confused than I was now.
Anyone else
We have 2 people on Zoom.
in the room? Okay, anybody on Zoom that would like to ask a question or have a comment in support or in opposition?
Monica? Monica, can you hear us? You've had your hand raised.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself.
It's okay, we can hear you.
So, I'm just trying to actually understand how this works. Will these rules apply to just properties that are in the city limits? What if they're outside of the city limits?
That's a great question. It only applies to rules within city limits. The municipal code does not apply to develop to properties outside of city limits.
Okay, so I'm like right on the edge of the city limits.
Can I get
And-
your name real quick before you?
Yes, sorry, Monica Cade, CADE.
Thank you.
And I'm just kind of wondering because there's some larger properties that are just outside the city limits. And I was just wondering if they were to want to develop that, is that something then they could probably be annexed into the city? But would you, as a neighbor, have the ability to chime in, to be opposed to it, should that happen? I'm not even saying that I would be opposed, but just if somebody was planning to, some big development that you didn't want to have happen, would you have the ability to oppose it once you pass these rules or not?
Yes, and these rules make it clear that there is a land use permit required, which includes neighbor notice and opportunity for comment. Without those rules, we don't really have that kind of legal infrastructure, and it's possible something could happen without neighbor notice.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Anyone else on Zoom?
Steve Krosky?
I'm speaking against because Chair Carey said it was time to speak against, so I'm here to speak against, and I think I could state Steve Toski, citizen of St. Helens. So I think that some of the earlier comments are accurate and some are not accurate. And as far as making findings of this quasi judicial body and making its recommendations to the city council, first and foremost, the thing that has been underscored by the questions of the planning commissioner Shoemaker and emphasized by Mr. Gretchen is that we do not need any more high density housing in St. Helens. We have exceeded our quota. We don't need it. And we have done what our city needs to do according to our housing needs analysis in 2019 and the housing that has been built since then. So I think it's important that the Planning Commission begins any approach on this with a finding that we have exceeded our high density housing allotment and we don't need to do this at all. There are other communities that need to contribute, but not ours. You have a responsibility as a planning commission to protect our neighborhoods, to protect the safety of our neighborhoods, and to protect our property values. And I will testify concerning some things that I observed on my recent mayoral campaign. And that is, I walked a lot of neighborhoods. And these are R5 neighborhoods that have homes in them. And I knocked on people's doors and I introduced myself. And there were many neighborhoods within St. Helens that I went to where the neighbors were kind enough to talk to me and to say, thank you for coming by and introducing yourself, but you don't need to bother to go to this house or that house because these are houses that are being run by businesses, nonprofits that are housing mentally ill people and people that they feel need not be approached. So within our neighborhoods, we have commercial operations that are operating housing for people who otherwise probably wouldn't be in that neighborhood. And that's a reality. And I observed Ms. Miller's comments, and that is she thought that SROs were a good idea to house the homeless. Okay, so if one is having a home where they're trying to raise their family in an R5 neighborhood or an R7 neighborhood or an R10 neighborhood or even an AR neighborhood, does that person want the house next door to be sold to somebody that's going to run an apartment complex for the homeless or the mentally ill? Because these are commercial operations that are existing within our city and they are real. And I think to Diane Dillard's property, that property easily could be sold to a commercial operation. And I believe that the gentleman who came, who was going to pick his kids up from karate practice or wherever he was headed, he's talking about the safety of his neighborhood and the safety of his children. And I also want to refute the observation of the gentleman who spoke earlier, and I forget his name, that he thinks that this would bring down housing costs. I disagree. And the reason is this: if you allow nonprofit commercial operations to buy properties within residential neighborhoods for the purposes of operating apartments, those commercial operations outcompete families trying to buy those housing units. So what you end up with by creating a commercial property market for people trying to create SROs is you end up having operations that are maybe don't ever have to have anything pencil out because they're either run by government funding or they're run by nonprofit funding, and their purpose is to buy housing units and then put in people to house that otherwise wouldn't be in those neighborhoods. So what happens then is a person trying to buy that single family unit is now outbid by a commercial buyer. So I don't think that this, let's just say, broad brush on the SROs, and I'm speaking about the SROs right now, is something that is going to produce what we want it to produce. So I would ask that the Planning Commission reject the SRO rules, number one, on the grounds that they're not needed. We don't need them. Our housing analysis says we don't need them. We don't need them for 20 years. That's how strong our housing analysis was in 2019. Certainly, I think that SRO should not be allowed in R10, R7, or R5. So if you look at your, Jacob actually did a very nice outline. And if you reject it, the recommendation would be to reject the SROs in R10, R7, and R5. And the only area that I think SROs should be considered as apartment residential, because those are zoned already for higher density housing. So if the Planning Commission was going to consider SROs, you're putting it in an area where people who are buying properties in that area or living in that area would already know that they can expect potentially some high density housing. Housing could be torn down and built in higher density formats. So I would ask that the Planning Commission reject going forward at this time with SROs in R10, R7, R5, and that would be the recommendation for the council for the reasons that I've stated. Regarding the manufactured housing, that should not occur within the city limits. That's just something that is going to end up causing a lot of problems. Having somebody able to put a manufactured home right next to a single family dwelling is going to end up with a lot of problems. There's no need for it. And I would just simply reject that as, I'm not sure if that's in there, but I'm trying to look at that, but I would reject that. No manufactured homes within residential developments, and then defend that on the basis of degradation of property values, degradation in neighborhoods. I mean, people buy into a neighborhood with the idea that there are going to be certain rules for other people that are going to come into that neighborhood. I'm not even sure. I mean, Jennifer would probably be a person to chime in on that, saying, oh, and by the way, somebody could come in here and you can put a manufactured home anywhere within the city limits. So I would reject that as just something unnecessary and detrimental to the overall quality of life in St. Helens, and reject it as a planning commission finding and defend it in court if needed. And then as far as the housing clusters, I don't think I've got a super strong opinion on that, but I do think that that's my testimony against those items and the structure of it. And thank you.
Thank you.
It's already allowed manufactured homes in the city. It's already.
For a long time.
Is there anyone else on Zoom who would like to testify? I've asked multiple times. I think that's it, but I'm just asking one more time.
I would like to, this is not, of course, testimony since I'm on the planning commission, but I would like to just clarify for the record, if speaking as someone with a disability and a mental ailment, there is no evidence that people in such categories are more likely to be perpetrators of crimes. In fact, the mentally ill, people with disabilities are by far more likely to be the victims of criminal activity. And I fortunately have not found in this community that people's attitude is that those of us struggling with those issues are not worth interacting with or talking to. And I think it's important to note for the record that that is, at least in my perception, not reflective of St. Helens or this community's values. And it is concerning to hear it argued in the contrary.
Okay, I'm not sure if he is standing to say that, because I'm not sure.
We already had a comment from you, sir. Thank you. Do you have a comment, ma'am?
I have one more question. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned that the state already has the rule that where if the person decides to put 4 dwellings, they just can, because it's state regulation is allowing to do so. So even they don't need even to go to ask the city of St. Helens, right? Because what you're saying, I want to have those rules in place, so somebody comes, I have them. But I also hear that the state already has those rules, and no matter what you do or not do, they still can do it. Right? On the 4,000, let's say on a 5,000 lot, if somebody just decides to buy the, foundation and everything, no matter what your answer will be, they still can do it, right? Because the state helps.
Yeah,
Right?
it's a good question. Because it brings up the issue that Mr. Tosky testified to. So let's say the single room occupancy thing. Let's say the planning commission is like, yeah, screw that, we don't want that, right? And then the council is receptive to that. And then we put in our code explicitly that single room occupancy is not allowed in some of the residential zoning districts. Now, someone could, if someone applies for a permit, we deny it based on that. And then they take the city to court. and they cite some of the state law that I had mentioned. Again, single room occupancy within an urban growth boundary, each local government shall allow the development of single room occupancy. And then there's two categories. There's your high density standard, and then there's your low density standard with up to 6 units on each lot or parcel zone to allow for the development of a detached single family dwelling. So it becomes challengeable. And as the city willing, put on the boxing gloves and try to fight that in
So
court.
basically you're trying to match the state.
Yeah, we're trying to align with the state.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Mr. Chairman, you had a number of people testify a couple of times, so I think it's only fair that you give Mr. Towski a chance.
But he's not commenting about anything to do here. He's commenting on somebody
Rebuttal.
else's comment.
Yeah. We don't need that.
I think it's fair.
Oh, okay.
I think it's fair
I
What?
didn't know.
because of the go arounds for these folks. Anybody on Zoom can have a go around.
Okay, all right. I'll let you rebut, Steve. You had something to say,
It's not in the room.
John? Okay,
Oh, okay, well, I guess.
all right.
Want to be fair, these folks.
So just to clarify something for me, right now, let's say I have a 5-bedroom house and I want to rent 3 rooms out. You can do it.
Yeah, because that doesn't meet the definition of single room occupancies. Once you get the 4th one, then it's in that category.
You have to have four parking spots.
I want to add something too. So I think Mr. Toski mentioned Diane Dillard's house. That's a 4-bedroom house. So technically you could buy it for $779,000 and develop an SRO and convert, would take 4 non-tandem parking spaces on that lot, which wouldn't fit. You couldn't make it work. Right. So I think that was a misunderstanding of how the rules work for conversions.
But without the rules, it may be possible to convert. We may not have the tools to even address parking.
The parking at least puts up a speed bump.
Yeah, if we rejected the SRO rules, we wouldn't have them to use in our toolbox to fight that sort of thing where we have a historic home.
It works for the neighborhood that it's safe.
Right, exactly.
Now, it doesn't mean you can say, you know what, we want to take the approach where we're gonna say it's prohibited. And then, let us duke it out if that comes up, and it's possible it won't come up for 10 years, we go through all this and whether or not we see them. But that's kind of the balancing act that we're dealing with.
Because there's no obligation if somebody comes to probably more building code necessarily, but there's not gonna be any SRO police. We're not gonna have an SRO police force that's gonna go around checking to see. There's no difference in somebody coming and getting a building permit for, you don't know if they're getting a 6-bedroom house. or a-
Where there used to be one, you might notice.
I just don't understand how this.
See a lot of
relates
properties
at all.
around you with 10 cars in trouble.
But without these rules, we have no protections on either side.
Seems like we need.
Not
to-
side, but do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
whether
Starting to get
you're.
into discussion,
Yeah.
deliberation. Any other questions for, it's good, questions for staff for clarifying? Hearing no more, hearing no further questions from the commission, no further responses from staff, the public record is closed. This matter is returned to the table for deliberations and recommendations to the city council.
I feel like if we don't have any sort of rules in place, we're unprepared and we're waiting for a mess to hit.
Yeah.
I think that if there's clear and concise, code and rules, then what is appropriate and what is not appropriate.
And I understand the angst that people have. I remember when I first moved into this town, they didn't allow manufactured homes and then they did and tore down a house behind me and put a manufactured home in. I didn't think it fit the neighborhood. I agree with that, but it's required to be able to allow it, right? Let's state, so it is. unless we have architectural standards in place. And then could that even prohibit it, architectural standards?
They would need to be clear, objective and reasonable. If we're applying it to residential, that's another discussion.
If we want the whole town to be a Bavarian look, you know, it wouldn't necessarily fit. Or Leavenworth or something.
I agree with you that we need to set some rules here. I think we're getting hung up on the name, the verbiage, calling it a SRO. It's like people renting rooms, so.
Yeah, and I think, if the state, if it's a requirement by the state, we have to, obey the rules, right? So we may as well be prepared for, when it, yeah, we may have the tools to deal with what that entails for the community.
I'm more concerned about as a real estate broker for 30 years here, I'm more concerned about the cottage clusters than SROs or property values.
And I think cottage clusters can be really
I
nice.
think it'd be great, but I'd like to see architectural standards on them.
Definitely needs to be a plan.
And when I worked in Salem, I used to walk through a couple of 1940s cottage clusters and they were really nice. And
They can be phenomenal, I think. They just.
talked to one of the residents there and they really loved it. And,
My brother lived in a development like that.
yeah.
Seattle's done it really effectively too, or Seattle.
With the little courtyard.
Yeah.
Can't get away with having your place look bad because you're part of the community. It's kept up better.
A quick observation, it's really hard to hear you guys. I don't know if the mic's gonna be turned up or if I can't.
Fortunately, they got rid of the mics in front of all of us.
We don't have mics anymore.
Been up here.
There's the mics up there.
They need to be opera singers.
We can hear it.
Thank you. We can speak up.
I'm sorry.
It's impossible from home when you watch from home to hear it too. So I know it's
A
frustrating.
thing or two that helps.
What?
I'm a singer, so.
Yeah, I get it. Me too.
I guess from my standpoint, which maybe you guys didn't hear, these are state rules and we should be prepared for what might be applied for. And we have to comply with those rules. So if we're prepared and we have the tools in place and those codes and regulations, and that protects everyone.
Gives.
I agree with that. I would rather us have a structure than wait for someone to show up and present us with a fait accompli and say, well, you didn't have any rules, so I'm doing whatever I want. Too late, I've already put up a building. I think if we've got a structure, we have something to work with, and I think that's our job.
Exactly.
We are required by law to do FROs. It's that simple. So in order to combat that, some of that is, and manage it, is these rules that we've decided or discussed on implementation.
I think it's up to the city council whether they want to fight having them at all and.
Yeah.
And the litigation that the expense of that, that's their prerogative, not ours. Ours is to set the language. Or the rules of order. Back to just being planners, not policymakers. Anybody else have any discussion? Is there particular sections? We've seen all these sections and their changes before. Right, Jacob?
Yes, this is all stuff that we.
You had one correction you said? What?
Oh, yeah, what I wanted to do, in the R10 and R7 zones.
What's part of the packet?
That is.
This is page, starting on page 2 of the code amendment. Attachment A.
It's 24
Oh, it's
on your
24.
24.
That portion.
So in all of the other zoning districts where it talks about lot size and setbacks, it calls out for single room occupancy. And it doesn't do that with R10 and R7, and it should. And that would be it would just be a little bit extra language.
This is something. Okay. Do we need to make those changes to?
I think if you agree with that, it wouldn't hurt to just mention it in the recommendation.
Okay.
That way the council doesn't think.
Anybody know what he's talking about?
Finally found the page.
Yeah, I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're feeling like you want to be a little more specific in these definitions.
Yeah, so in R7 and R10, where it gives minimum lot size. Minimum lot size for single family dwellings, duplexes, and single room occupancies is this. It's listed in all the other ones. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the reason I didn't, when I was working on this many months ago, was this, well, it would already be a single family dwelling. Those standards are gonna apply anyways. But in revisiting it in preparation for these hearings, I'm like, oh yeah, this should really be clearer, because sometimes you separate it and then reread it, you just fresh eyes. So it wouldn't change the rules we talked about, it just makes sure it's clearer. So you're not having an arm wrestling contest over the counter.
You want to make the motion?
Oh, I do?
Where it is.
So how would we move to recommend to accept?
Yeah, you would recommend the amendments, approval of the amendments to the council with the modifications as described by staff.
Yes.
Okay.
What Jacob said. No, I guess a move to recommend to approve the modifications. With the addition of what Jacob wants to add to R10 and R7.
I will second that.
Thanks, David.
How do you vote?
Aye.
Before I vote, I'd like to thank everybody that came here to the testimony. It's great to see.
Yes.
Tom and I.
David?
He says.
Oh,
Yep, I second it.
okay, that's right. Well, I can still vote.
I will also vote aye.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. One more thing. The commission only provides a recommendation to the council on this matter, who will conduct a subsequent public meeting, just so you know. We already said that a few times.
So we gotta do this again if you wanna join us.
Well,
But it'll be
with the council. It'll be us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We still have other business, but on this matter, we're done.
You're welcome to stay.
Yeah.
if you like.
We get into the more boring stuff now.
Kind of clear as mud, so.
I'm gonna use the restroom.
I can keep my impression of both things we're doing here.
That's a lot of time.
So one and done.
Yeah.
They're already doing it. The neighbor is like a smaller house, basically.
Your new house.
Your new?
New house.
Really? Oh, yeah, that's.
Right house.
Yeah, that's,
I mean.
isn't that compartmentalized for?
Oh, got it. Okay.
I've never checked into it. I don't know what the zoning.
We have a talent of what.
Is it done legally?
Since.
Is it done legally?
But I don't, it just seems impossible to police to me.
I just don't like the categorizing people are really.
I didn't get everybody. I got all the ones that were.
And those are my clients.
I think I got all, I think I only missed a couple.
They don't have the right to live in a decent house in a nice neighborhood.
No,
You know,
especially with somebody who was saying about it. About the Yes. So.
I really wasn't anxious for someone to rebut somebody else's comment, but is their opinion.
They were both online and that was my thing. It was like, it was a weird thing and neither one of them.
Just wasn't
I
sure.
wouldn't have allowed it in the room either.
Oh, in person.
Not if you're feeling insulted by something someone said.
Yeah.
Allow them to read.
Yeah, I understand that, but I
They're still
we weren't
live.
really sure.
Yeah, we're live.
Afraid of what I said. So the next section, is planning commission term expirations.
Yeah, so this is a carryover from last meeting. We know Dan is riding off into the sunset. That's not changing. Everybody shed a tear for Dan. All right. David Rosengard, I contacted him in July and he wanted to confirm continuing in September. There was some discussion last month about attendance. You wanted to talk about that before the planning commission affirmed that. And then the other thing we wanted to find out was the voting results. We weren't sure if Carlson would make it to the council or
I
not.
wasn't working that hard at it.
And now we know the results.
Yeah.
So that won't result in a change up here. So we have a couple orders of business.
For us.
Hmm?
Good for us.
And
But
then
what about the other person?
Charles,
Yeah,
he is,
His term's another year beyond.
I haven't seen him for a while.
so there was, there's a few things. There was a desired discussion of attendance, and that was from the body. And then there's whether or not you want to recommend approval of Rosengard's new term. And then also for at least Dan's replacement, we do have a pool of a couple folks for that. And we need to figure out who our planning commission interview committee is going to be. So those are the three things: discussion of absenteeism, or David's renewal, and then the planning commission interview committee
Do we need to decide chair and vice chair?
in January.
All right.
That'll be your problem.
That'll be
Not
with the new.
Handcuff you to your seat.
So whatever order you want to do that in. Would be me.
Well, we do want to talk about attendance. What is the rule of attendance?
I think it's three
Yeah.
consecutive.
Yeah,
Confused.
Yeah. Three consecutive.
had some people that lady who came for maybe for two, just never showed up again.
I mean,
That's
it's,
why I said, I don't think she's coming back. So
it's nice to just ask people, is this what you thought? Are you still interested? Rather than just let it go on and on with them not coming.
Yeah, we have an obligation to the public to be able to get a
Well, and
quorum.
if they're,
and,
I mean, if somebody is like, doesn't feel good about quitting and like, oh, I don't know if I can quit, but it's like, if it's too much for you or your life changed and you can't come anymore.
we've had the discussion with some
Yeah.
people.
Other people have had that conversation.
as part of, when I've been on the interview committee, specifically question them as to, do you have the ability to be here and to attend meetings?
It's one day a month. And we've had a number of times where we were squeaking by with the quorum. The last few months, so. It's a concerning thing. I mean, all of us should occasionally have a absence, sickness, or wife surgery or illness,
Broken ankle.
yeah. Or even a vacation that's been planned, you know, but.
I know we have to accommodate with Zoom and everything, but I think it speaks differently to the public when we're all sitting here with our butts in seats. Traditionally, when we had those long-term planning commissioners sitting here,
They were always here.
they're always here. And we need to be here. If we're in town and we can get here, we need to be here. We made that commitment.
So Christina, if you don't mind, could you, repeat, we talked about last meeting about.
So I was just telling Jenny that I took a small attendance of all of you for the last, so Scott and Brooke only had 8 meetings available to them to attend, but the rest of you had 11 meetings that were available to attend, and so I just took attendance based out of those 11. And I have Dan Carey at 9, Jennifer Shoemaker at 9, Jenny Carlson at 7, Scott at 8 out of 8. Go Scott. David 7 out of 11, and then Charles 6 out of 11, and then Brooke 6 out of 8. And I would mention there's only been one person, there was only one absence from one person that we just didn't hear from them, but the rest of them have all been, somebody has said, I can't make it for whatever, a legitimate reason.
They're not unexcused absences.
Correct.
And the big bad in the code are 3 consecutive unexcused absences. Specifically says without an excuse as approved by the planning commission.
So to be frank, David, we felt like you haven't attended well. And I want to make sure that you want to still be committed to this committee and attend.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And I agree with everything people said over the last 5 minutes or so about the importance of attendance, and that if people can't or don't want to do this anymore, they should make way for others, as well as the importance of attending in person when that's possible. In the interest of transparency, I probably should have gone into this detail earlier, but I've been dealing with I don't know the exact diagnosis because doctors haven't given it to me, but some sort of red blood count issue that frankly is kind of kicking my ass. I don't think that will prevent me from, being present and cognizant. I also don't think that would prevent me from showing up in person, although I suppose if the answer that the doctors get to is that my immune system is imperiled, then I might need to do more Zoom calls. But yeah, I would like to continue, and I can certainly commit to saying that if I hit a point where due to medical reasons I can't, I can at least be forthright about that. I honestly really was not prepared for this and was kind of hoping it would get better, and it hasn't. So that's where I'm at.
Sorry for your illness.
Yeah, sorry to hear that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
We didn't know because it's none of our business, but.
Well, I also didn't tell you, so that's on me. Like I said, I was kind of naively just hoping it would get better, and it is not so far.
Thank you, David, for being frank. Does anybody have a problem with that?
No.
Okay. So,
Yeah, do you want a motion for his renewal?
yeah, so I was just gonna do. So we have a motion.
But we renew David's term.
Second.
Now you vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes, David can't vote. I can't either. Would make a difference anyway.
We already got 4 anyway.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Good luck.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'll be listening in. Make sure you guys stay honest.
And then who's fixing this time to be on the interview committee?
I believe I'm married to one of the applicants, so I should probably not be on the committee. I would appreciate not being on the committee. How's that?
So let's talk about that a second. So do anybody see an issue with spouses being on the committee together?
Well, the first issue is
I've had that.
more than 2 people of the same profession.
Yeah.
And we have 2 attorneys.
Is your wife an attorney?
No, she went to law school, but she is not an attorney.
Oh, okay. I guess I'm mistaken on
Yeah,
that.
she works in tech. She's not an attorney.
Okay, all right. I guess I just assumed. Sorry, pardon my stupidity. All right, well, that's a good question.
I have issues with that if my son has has some interest in doing it. I just don't think it'd be appropriate if him and I were both on the planning commission. It's like almost like one opinion. I just don't think it's that says, doesn't feel appropriate.
Especially with the meetings laws, you know, we haven't had any clarity with that. And, you know, having, you know,
The what?
meetings laws. You know,
The meetings, the
Oh
outside.
gosh, yeah, I don't want every time I'm home to be on the verge of a quorum.
yeah. It's also a question of being able
Go
to
visit 'em.
discuss that. You know,
Yeah.
with two people.
Yeah.
That's something that needs to be clarified, and hopefully next Monday
Good point.
Serial meetings.
we'll
Yeah.
have some clarification on that.
And
Well, I think to add to all of that, you know, even not to make it about myself and Diana, but you know, even in a world where two spouses or siblings or parent-child, you know, could operate fully independently and be reaching their own decisions without any angst, I do think that it would pose the specter of impropriety to the public.
Yeah, the appearance, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That was the phrase I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah.
She's probably, be a great addition, other than that.
Yeah,
but-
and I
Oh,
mean,
you'll have
again,
an
in
interview.
light of what I've said about my condition, if she applies and if she gets selected, I'm fine, you know, making the choice to step down and focus on my health, and she can be on the commission. But yeah, I think it makes sense to say, you know, I don't know if the line would be immediate family or what, but there's probably a line to be drawn there somewhere.
It's not in the rules, but it's just the appearance of, right?
yeah, and if, if you would like as a commission, as part of acknowledging the interview committee to just, as a commission, provide input on the family member aspect, it would just help.
Yeah.
The process.
It's really the interview committee's thing. It's just some discuss a little bit.
Okay, yeah, that's fine too.
We should ask if he'd give her a reference.
Okay, so.
Okay.
Baker Jacobson, we always have the counselor. And we'll get those scheduled soonish.
How many applicants do we have?
We have, yeah, so we had the one from the latest advertisement. And then we have two that were already prior submittals that were still interested. They were ones that we received outside of a prescribed ad. And so we just kept them on the record. When we were talking about this before, I had Christina call them, and two of the three were still interested. So we got a small handful. We only need one good one, so.
Hope you get better, David.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, so 2025 public meeting schedule. What's that about?
So this is where we force Dan to not leave. No, just kidding. So we just wanted to talk about November and just make sure we're not gonna get frowny faces for this. So the normal second Tuesday in November falls on Veterans Day next year. That's not gonna work because that's a holiday. So we internally talked about, well, what if we just move it to November 12th, which is a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday?
That was great.
So mark your calendar,
Get a vote.
So no frowny faces?
it's an off council day, so.
That's fine.
Okay, yeah, we just wanted to confirm it's cool, then we can let Lisa know at the recorder's office to put that, so. No frowny faces, good.
That it?
Yeah, that's
One conflict?
the only thing we wanted to talk about on that one.
So one thing I'm kind of curious about is when we talk about how consistent the old planning commissioners were, the meetings were at 7 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock, right? We changed it to 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Is that
The 6 o'clock, the 6 o'clock makes it difficult for me. And there are times when I have missed meetings because it was at 6. Because my work runs up to 5 and I can't walk away from somebody that's in Portland. Sorry, I'm not taking you home from the dentist because I have a planning commission meeting. But there's, you know, I mean, there's times when I have
Yeah, I was curious about
people's
that.
lives.
It made it harder.
When it was 7 o'clock as sitting in the counselor's chair, I never missed a meeting ever. But at 7 o'clock, my work is completely done always. So there's times when 6 o'clock is a conflict for me. But I wasn't gonna say anything because people don't like staying until 11 either.
When I was interviewed for this job, I worked in Salem and it said, are you gonna have trouble getting here by 7 o'clock? I said, well, I beat Vern. He's just across the street. You're up.
You know, it's easier for staff, 6 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, if you recall, we were starting to have meetings that just
Remember those
were
really long?
marathons.
Yeah.
And it was one after another.
What?
It would keep us fresher too, right? Because by the time you get past 10, it's like you're dead, you're fried.
But what I saw happened, and it may have been the chairman at the time, it seemed like it was like another hour to spend more time. And it didn't really get us out earlier much.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it helped. Had a few 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, very, very few. But
So, you know, I guess it's a question, do we want to go back to 7? Do we want to try a middle ground and go to 6:30?
It would make a difference for me.
Yeah.
If we went to 6:30, it would be easier.
It would make a difference.
For mine, yeah.
But a lot of times I am just busting hump to get home and it's like, I guess I'm zooming.
yeah, I would rather you be here.
David, do you have any input on that?
Either one works for me. Either one's equally good.
Does your wife work out of town?
You,
No, she does not. She works remote as well.
I mean, I'm just in Ireland. We get off at 5:30. I just come straight here. I want to be, I guess, cognizant of everybody's needs. Staff's been here all day, you guys coming from various places, so. I'm neutral, either way, whatever you guys want.
I mean, you know, I've went to 7 o'clock for over 15 years, so, you know, it's nothing new.
doesn't affect me one way or the other, but it does.
Yeah, I mean, the council moved all their meetings around. I thought those were set in stone, so I mean, you can do whatever you want.
I think 6:30 would be a nice compromise, I think.
You want to start trying 6:30, beginning
January, or was it?
beginning
Is that gonna
January?
work for you? I think I wanna make sure that it works for you. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I will make every effort at whatever time it's selected, because that's what you sign on to when you sign on to this commitment.
but that extra half hour, would that?
It makes a difference.
Big difference.
I mean, any minutes is a difference. You know, when you're trying to create that gap between getting off work and showing up here and being in the right frame of mind for this.
I'm up for whatever you guys vote for, so.
You didn't know if you had a bedtime.
I do, and it's now.
When it First came on, I said, do they always go this late?
About 5, so, but I can go till 11 and still get up and be fine.
So,
Ask the candidates how fast they can talk and whether they're good about being brief.
so do you want to start that in December? I don't think we have anything officially, yeah, we haven't sent any notices yet.
Or do you want to wait until you have a new person?
I think it makes sense to set it with the public meetings calendar adopted. That's the official notice to everybody about, like, we adopted one last year and it said 6 o'clock all year. So I don't know if it would be appropriate.
So I was wondering if we.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So it would be starting in January.
Which is,
Didn't the council have to approve it last time?
yeah, it goes every January. That's why we're talking about it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, anybody else?
Do you want to, we should probably vote on that just to,
Do we need a motion?
I think so. Yeah, that starting in January, official meeting times at 6:30.
So moved.
Second, we have a second?
Right.
Ready to vote?
Aye.
I
Right.
Aye.
All right, that's a big surprise. So, I was just gonna say, is it anything about the planner director decisions that you're burning about?
Is there anything that has come out of those, all those CCMH hearings?
Yes, so the variance was approved for the access and the unlisted use was approved. Those haven't been challenged. Because of that effort, the neighbor who wasn't included in the application, but we were talked about their access. I don't know if you've been by there, but they've gotten permits, you know, they started, so that actually was positive.
Pavement.
That stuff's been worked out, and then
Didn't he do something first off? Didn't he modify it first off?
who
Neighbor,
modify for stuff.
their driveway, their access. So because they had modified it without
Yeah, they
any,
paved it and they got a right of way permit.
oh, okay, I thought they did it without any,
Yes, initially, and then
They fixed it.
the dialogue that result from the CCMH application resulted in him talking to us. We talked about all the stuff, and then you see the physical improvements based on that discussion out there. So
just
good
clarifying.
progress.
Now that your driveway is well over 200 feet from the other driveway.
And then the conditional use permit is almost certainly, we're gonna have that hearing in December. For the rest of it.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
so we saved your packets for that.
the other question I have is,
It's a new application. You didn't review it.
Oh,
So it'll be just like new, but
you would have saved your packet.
I thought we saved the packet for
Well, that
some,
wouldn't hurt to have the.
for some reason.
yeah, it's, I mean, there's some relevance, but it is a new application. We re-notified.
Okay.
All of everything is brand new. Everyone can participate, even if you didn't participate in the first hearings.
It is a clean hearing.
Yeah, it's a clean hearing.
And the other question I have is, what's the status on stuff that's going out there by the old hospital? Cause I thought you said there was some permits out there for Napa?
Yeah, we have a land use permit for Napa, and actually, we'll talk about this in our semi-annual report, which you'll get. Probably in December as well, but so the Napa submitted a land use application. After talking with them about that site for 10 years, literally 10 years, that's not an exaggeration. And the Quick Lube place, they're trying to work out their access to the street. I think they're gonna go to Burger King. Some of the stuff with Dairy Queen isn't working out. Dairy Queen, the status hasn't changed. They have their land use permit approval, but they haven't. Their building permit really hasn't moved.
Napa would be between the Quick Lube and Burger King.
Napa would be on the other south of Burger King across the street.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Closer to that wetland there. If you know the one,
but not on the townhouse side.
highway side, highway frontage.
Yeah.
I was just curious that when
I
you see
don't-
that, when you see the little things come up and I'm like, oh. Trying to figure out if somebody took somebody else's spot or if they have a new spot.
And then the big place in between the Quick Lube and Burger King. It's the same person who owns the Quick Lube lot, and they've had some ideas, but nothing's set in stone yet, so nothing worth spreading rumors over.
Didn't they consider putting administrative building there or something initially? Thought that was-
That really hasn't been part of the discussion.
It's not gonna be a Winco?
A Winco,
Well, if you get a Winco to fit on that lot.
SRO parking.
wasn't all there.
There's has been a lot of interesting things I'll just talk about briefly. We got the lot line adjustments done for Project Arcadia. That is selling off the mill. Which is important for the budget because some of the budget is based on some one-time revenues.
So, I'm confused. You're selling off the white paper, right?
Not the whole
The
property.
mill, not the entire hundreds of acres.
Where Boise used to sit.
That's correct, yeah.
The company's called Arcadia.
I don't know why it's called Project Arcadia.
Because isn't that what this building down here used to be called?
Orcadia.
Okay, sorry, my bad.
Close.
Yeah, I don't know the history behind the project name.
All right, it's just the name in my head. I was like, to get clarity.
What do they want it for?
For the mill. They want to restart the mill.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was in the spotlight.
That's spotlight.
So that's positive. And they've already done some work out there. So it's clear they care about their. The Armstrong site, the old ceiling tile place that has been purchased by a data center company. And we're working on scheduling a pre-application meeting for a data center
Enough power for
at
that?
that site. I don't know.
I was working with,
The data center mean like mining or something. I don't know.
It's a lot of servers and power.
I was working with.
Armstrong's completely different than Boise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was working with a consultant.
Isn't there cleanup on that side too?
Yes.
there's,
I was working with a consultant as a regulator, who was working on the cleanup of that site for DEQ. It's a long, multi-year process. Do you have any idea where that
The
is?
Armstrong site? Well, so I do. So they did a lot line adjustment several years ago to separate the uplands from the lowlands. And the idea was behind that, I talked to the DEQ people, is all the nasty stuff is on the lowlands. And they wanted to make sure there was a separation. That way someone could potentially obtain the upper lands and not be encumbered by the lowlands.
Yeah.
DEQ had a desire to purchase the lowlands so they could kind of control the cleanup and stuff, but they didn't have a revenue source. Interestingly, the data center people purchased both and seemed to want to use both, including punching a new axis in Old Portland Road. And I'm sure they're aware of the legal stuff, because when the lot line adjustment went through, the legal stuff that they put on the deed, there were definitely a lot of attorneys working on it. And attorneys who are well versed in the environmental law.
I think there's like a settlement of $70 million to clean it up.
Yeah, that I don't know. But I've personally seen some of the steps towards it.
Well, it's good that just things are moving forward. It's positive.
Yeah, it may not be a lot of jobs, but it's tax base and, it's.
Overall, it's
not doing
progress.
anything now, so.
It's closer to a finish line than we were a year ago.
We can require a trail there to have our Scappoose St. Helens Trail do that part.
not as part of a land transaction.
No.
But there's land use approvals that trigger.
That'd be perfect.
Did you hear that?
So those were a couple big things I thought were mention worthy.
Speaking of the trail, no motion from
Um,
not on,
It's closer. They got back. DOJ made comments on the contract and there's one more round, unfortunately, that they have to send back, but I know.
well, you know my number.
It is closer. Yeah.
And I think we're kind of on hold with proactive items. Do we know if we can talk to each other? Outside of this room?
They had that ethics meeting
Hasn't happened yet.
No, it's on the 18th,
on
next
the
Monday.
18th. That's right. I remember getting the email and calling her about it.
Be there for your information items.
On the edge of my seat over O'Reilly Auto Parts. Finally.
Sign. Yeah, they kept calling me about when is it gonna get issued? They were really eager to move forward. So hopefully they're moving as fast as we issued the permit in like 3 days after we got it, because I knew they were like.
Finally,
That's great. Finally.
a new sign up. 4 years, 5 years?
I actually have pictures in the report of what it looked like when KFC was there.
Which it was a nasty looking sign in that photo, because it was just all, I don't know.
And then when it became an art sculpture for a while.
Did it ever get worked out of who was responsible for that?
That was
City or?
related.
Yeah, the city wasn't involved. The delay was the fact that it was a shared sign, because you had that storage business in that area that was using it too. So that's what kind of delayed things happening. And with the sign permit, it's just O'Reilly's, so they must have separated ways.
It'll be a cleaner sign.
Right, yeah, interesting,
sense.
interesting saga, the O'Reilly sign saga.
I always wonder how it got dented so far up initially. It's like,
Oh, yeah,
that dented it for years.
Yeah, the oak tree.
yeah, limbs.
Yeah, the oak tree that was preserved for KFC, and then we continued to preserve for O'Reilly's.
Even when the sign was standing, it had this big dent in the
Oh,
down part,
Huh.
oh, okay.
middle part.
They're reducing the height of
Oh,
it
you're talking
too,
about, yeah.
making it lower, which I don't know, that was a choice they had, but
Aren't they just using the same pole?
they are,
Simple.
but lower.
All right. I think we're adjourned. Yeah, that's.